So now we're going to look at a different model. This is called the feature comparison model, and instead of things being organized in a network with nodes and links, it portrays human knowledge as a big, vast semantic space. Information is organized according to the meaningful concepts. And so imagine as a big plain that contains little hills and valleys where knowledge and concepts that we already know about are sort of clustered together. So you can think of the hills as areas where there are these groups of concepts that are closely related, and then the valleys are the spaces in between different types of concepts. To kind of get a sense of how the feature comparison model organizes knowledge, we can look at how a group of students rated the similarity of different birds and mammals. So we have here on the left, in these four squares, how they sort of clustered the different examples of birds, and on the right, how they grouped together or clustered the different examples of mammals. And we're going to concentrate on the birds first. They organized geese and ducks and chickens together. They thought they were very similar to each other. And for example, robins and sparrows and cardinals were also, and blue jays were also pretty close together. But hawks and eagles were sort of different from those other birds, but they were similar to each other. And so some birds, like hawks, were perceived as being pretty different from blue jays and pretty different from chickens, but very similar to eagles. And eagles were similarly sort of organized, right? And so when they looked at how people think of these concepts, they found that they seem to cluster them and organize them in terms of whether the birds are, prey, birds that, maybe are eaten essentially, or are they predators? So over here, the hawks and eagles, kind of classic predators versus the domesticated geese and ducks and chickens. And then they also organized them on size, big birds versus smaller birds. And they organized the blue jays here, for example, as predatory birds, but smaller than the hawks and the eagles. And you can see that they did something pretty similar with mammals, where mammals were also organized in these clusters where there are sheep, goats, and cows together, cat and mouse together, deer and bear together. And so we can see that they had smaller animals versus bigger animals, and they also organized animals in terms of predators or prey. They seem to organize these different animals on the same two dimensions, big versus small, and predator versus prey. The feature comparison model claims that some features are defining features, whereas others are characterizing features. So a defining feature is one that is necessary and sufficient to specify the requirements for belonging to a category. So for example, the potential to lay eggs is a necessary feature of birds. That is a defining feature. A characterizing feature, in contrast, can describe the commonly occurring characteristics of many, but not all members of a category that we're most familiar with. So a lot of birds will build nests in a tree. So we can say that that is a characteristic of birds. It's a characterizing feature, but it is not necessary to do this for an animal to be considered a bird, right? And in fact, not all birds nest in trees. And so laying eggs is a defining feature. It's necessary for an animal to be considered a bird. But building a nest in a tree is not a defining feature. It's a characterizing feature. When asked about robins and birds, we retrieve the defining and characterizing features of each and compare them. Now here's a question though, which do we rely on most, defining or characterizing features? So again, think of what are some of the defining features of a robin, what are some of the characterizing features of a robin? Here's a robin for us to look at. So we might be thinking about the colors of a robin versus, say, a crow or a blue jay. right? Very different color schemes. And so we might be thinking about that. We might be thinking that robins fly. If we are thinking about those types of characteristics, then we're probably relying on the defining ones, the ones that define a robin versus a different type of bird. Let's think about a few different concepts here. We can ask a person, is a robin a school bus? So obviously no, but that's a way of getting us to think about what are the defining features. So is a robin a school bus? Is a robin a bird? Is a bat a bird? You can think of this for different types of birds. So for example, for a crow, what are the defining features of a crow? Well, they have all black feathers, right? And there's probably some other ones. They have a black beak, maybe talk about how they fly. The concept is a school bus. We can start off with, well, a defining feature of a school bus is that it transports school children, right? Birds in general, oh, a bird will have feathers. Birds fly. But here's some question marks. Does a bird have to fly to be a bird? Or is that more of a characterizing feature? Yeah, so not all birds have to fly. Flying is characteristic of birds, but it's not a defining feature. Bat is a mammal that flies, right? That's kind of a defining feature. And we can probably think of maybe some other ones as well. But we might also think of some characterizing features, for example, that bats fly or that bats eat insects. So those are characteristic of bats, but flying and eating insects are not what makes a bat a bat. And that does not distinguish bats from other similar types of animals. So the feature comparison model kind of relies on our ability to organize what we know about a concept or an idea, and of the knowledge that we have about a concept, how much of that knowledge is just characteristic but not necessary, not defining, and how much of that knowledge is actually necessary and defining. So to test the feature comparison model, they will typically ask a participant a very simple question: is a robin a bird? So that's a very simple question. And the person then, in this case, would say yes, a robin is a bird, so the answer would be true. They would respond very quickly to this type of question. The similarity between the two concepts is very high. So the similarity in the defining features of a robin and the defining features of a bird will have a lot of overlap, so there's a high similarity, and people respond very quickly. So is a robin a bird? Is a robin an animal? Here, they will also say yes, the answer is true. And there is similarity between the features of a robin and the features of an animal, but not quite as much overlap as with a bird, so the similarity is medium here. And it turns out that it slows people down a little bit as the similarity goes down. So if two items are somewhat similar, it takes longer to say no, for example, or yes. But if we think of these two down here, where the answer is a no, a false, if the two items are somewhat similar, it takes them longer to say no. They are not the same than if they are very different in this case. So is a robin a rock? So the similarity between a robin and a rock is very low. They don't share a lot in common, right? The answer is definitely false. And because there's not much overlap in the features of a robin and the features of a rock, people answer that very quickly. Now, as there's more overlap between the features of the two concepts, for example, is a robin a fish? There are some things that fish have that robins have, like hearts, right, and skin. And so there's more similarity. Similarity now is medium, and that tends to slow people down. So if we're saying no, we want the two concepts to be really different, have very low similarity, and that makes it easier to say no. Oh my gosh, these two concepts are totally different, have nothing in common. If the answer is true, it's almost easier if the two concepts are highly similar, because we're looking for what do they have in common, right? So if they're very, very, very similar, it's easy to see, oh yeah, lots in common, yes. A robin is definitely a bird, and a robin is definitely an animal. Feature comparison model makes predictions about the pattern shown by students when asked these questions, and the predictions have been supported by the results of the type of these studies that they've done. And so this ability of the feature comparison model to tell us something that research has not already shown makes it a kind of an important theory in cognitive psychology. It's not as intuitive perhaps as the network model, but it does sort of reflect how a lot of our knowledge is organized.